It's also the case that we need to look at the rehabilitation side of it, irrespective of how it's managed. Like I said earlier, it seems to me that for most cases you should be able to get somebody back to work within 2.5 years if they're capable of getting back to work. But what we've had with WorkCover is, as a number of people alluded here, we've had a case management system where your case manager disappears on you every 3, 5 weeks or months, whatever. For most people that doesn't make any difference. The overwhelming people on WorkCover are in and out of the system within a month. It's the people who are there on an ongoing basis. It's the people with the more serious injuries. They're the one you judge the system by. They're the one you judge success by. Let's be clear. It's much more difficult to deal with people who've been on the system for an extended period. It's always difficult to deal with people who've got more serious injuries. And after a while, they also, in many cases, ended up with psychological problems as well. WorkCover really is supposed to be about helping people. But in many respects, it's quite anti-therapeutic. It doesn't get you better, it gets you worse. That needs to change. That can only change, I think, with a change in management, and equally important, a change in the operating culture. There's no point getting rid of whoever's the top person there at the moment. You need a more thoroughgoing reform process, and you need a new culture. I know from my dealings with some of the better self-insurers, and they're not all good, but quite a few are, what drives them is good rehabilitation. They don't have the case manager running the show. They have the rehabilitation person running the show, and that works a lot better. And that's how, in many cases, they're able to keep their costs down. If you do the right thing, the money will follow. But with WorkCover and EML, it's always money first. If they just did their job, that would happen anyway. To do that, as I said, there needs to be a change in culture. There also needs to be new policies. I've always thought that most people can go back to work with their current employer, but there's going to be a percentage who can't. They're the people from a WorkCover perspective who cost the money. So what should be done with them? My view is that they shouldn't be thrown off the scheme. What should happen is that 6 months after their injury, they should be examined in terms of their potential for retraining. I don't mean just going on a job search, reading the newspapers. When people have got serious injuries, employers are less likely to employ them. Why would you employ somebody who's got a back injury when you can get somebody who hasn't? So what we've got to look at, it's not that difficult. Sorry, it is difficult, but it's common sense as well. We need to look at retraining programs to assist people get back to work. Now, that hasn't been done. WorkCover doesn't keep those statistics even. It has not really been interested over the years. I'd like to finish with just one brief comment about interstate schemes. We had a bit of talk earlier about they have better return to work rates. Actually, they don't, or if they do, we don't know, because none of those schemes either measure their return to work rates other than at maybe 6 months. The reason premiums are lower in other jurisdictions like Queensland, Melbourne and so forth is because they have an entitlement regime where workers are thrown off the scheme much earlier. It's true that in some schemes they have workers have access to common law, but as workers have been using the common law option, increasingly the various schemes have been tightening up access. So one, they cut your weekly payments, and then when people start using common law, they start putting restrictions on that as well. Now, by getting those premiums lower at the price of entitlements to injured workers, all that does really is transfer, as Mark was saying, transfers the costs from industry onto the backs of injured workers and also onto taxpayers. Because what happens when people are thrown off the schemes, they try and get into the social security system, maybe through DSB or something like that. That means the rest of us pick up the tab for that. And it seems to me if we're talking about an employer-funded workers' compensation scheme, then the costs should be where they belong, with industry. I might add that where you go about subsidising industry for work-related injuries, that also in an economic sense dulls the incentive to improve workplace safety. If the cost of your accidents, and I don't use that word, but if the cost of injuries have been reduced for you, there's less of an incentive to do something about it. Now, I know in the real world there are a lot of employers who don't operate on that simplistic economic model. They actually have a concern for the workers. But there are others who don't. And quite often they're in the high risk areas, and they're the last people in the world we should be subsidising. So, we also need to look at who's going to help with the reform process. As has been pointed out, these changes were introduced by a Labor government. These were the most draconian WorkCover changes in South Australia's history. But as has also been pointed out, couldn't happen unless they had the support of the Liberal Party as well. It was only in the upper house where you had the Greens, you had Family First, and you had the independents such as Anne, and also I think in the lower house, Chris Hanna, who were opposing these changes. It seems to me almost criminal that responsibility for the failures of the WorkCover scheme, which I think is everybody acknowledges. I know both in the Liberal Party, the Labor Party, and in business and the trade unions, it's obvious to everybody there that the real problem has been WorkCover. It hasn't been the people it's supposed to support. So I think in the future we need to start putting pressure on all the parties to, one, face up to the truth about what's happened and why, and then to start looking at proper solutions that will make our WorkCover scheme what it was intended to be. Something which would take care of injured workers and their families when somebody was injured or killed at work. Thank you very much.